Hi everyone, I'm Sanjana. I'm an intern with JA and I'm here with Eric for another fireside chat. Thank you, Eric, for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm pleased to, you know, provide some background and try to give some good advice. No promises, but thank you for having me again.
Of course. So, just jumping right on in, please tell us about your educational and professional backgrounds and the path that you took to get to the position that you're in today.
Thanks. So I actually, professionally speaking, I work for PSEG, and I am at what they title as a category sourcing lead, which really just means overview of managing different types of like products. So easy example here is our company buys ammonia, but not the ammonia you would use in your house. We buy a much larger portion of it. So I manage the category, put together the contract or contracts needed, and sourcing of it, and help negotiate with suppliers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, of managing really the front and the back of it. Just completely, that's just one of many categories. Another easy category to give you an example of is corporate security. So if you go to any PSEG site, you'll usually see security guards. I work with the vendor or vendors that provide that service and negotiate those contracts, do the bid events where we select and procure those services or materials in other cases. So corporate security is one of my more bigger clients that I do a lot of work for, but I have other categories just like that. So it's my current role right now. But how did I get here is a really funny, interesting story, I'd say. So I have a bachelor's a degree from Monmouth University in political science. That is not something people would probably think of when they think of procurement or supply chain. It is quite kind of a different path. But when I was pursuing that degree, I was still trying to kind of figure out what kind of path I'd be on myself. And one of the things that had happened during the process of me graduating was the Department of Defense and the Department of the Army came to the college. So I went to Monmouth University, and they were doing what they called the BRAC, which is, if anybody had lives in that area in Monmouth County, you might be familiar with Fort Monmouth. Fort Monmouth was an Army base that has since closed. Those folks were going to be moving down to Maryland in another base, and there's a lot of people that were employed there on the logistics side of things. So anyway, they were really just recruiting college students to basically be interns for that program. So I just remembered it at the time. I was working in the state legislature for a state senator at the time as an intern. So I had interned for like 3 years, unpaid interns. So I had done that for 3 years, and after that, I got a job with that person a little bit right around the same time I graduated. A little bit after that, I'd been doing some political campaign work to kind of, kind of start off that career. And I worked there as kind of in the state legislature, working in like, the policy side of things and communication side of things for about a year. So I wasn't involved in all the campaign stuff, but it was still kind of a risky career. You're still subject to elections and re-elections and all that stuff. And for me, I didn't really see a good long-term necessarily a future for me in that. So I had remembered when, that the program came to my college and recruited, and I applied. And I was fortunate and lucky enough to get really good timing. The person I was working for, a state senator, actually lost his reelection. So my job was gone. Would have been gone in January. And I started working for the Army 2 months before that in November as a civilian. Uh, just a distinction, a civilian is not a enlisted soldier or anything like that. So I wasn't subject to, a lot of that stuff. But you work as civilian, you start off entry level, and you learn a lot on the job. So I did that for 4 years, and I think I got a much better background in supply chain management in a lot of the tools I use today, whether it just be SAP or even just Excel, which is a lot of tools that most people know how to use. But the way you take out a lot of data and you try to make it make sense, things like that, which I think is as a business analytics major, you might actually understand. But it's sort of got a lot of background in that kind of form, and I managed a lot of products from beginning to the end. So the only big problem with this job is it's located in Maryland, and I live in New Jersey. So I was on a van pool with a lot of people that had done that movement from Fort Monmouth to that base in Maryland, with like 14 other people. So you're doing basically a 2.5 hour commute each way in a van. It's not fun. You got to drive like once or twice a week too, but it was pretty rough, 4 to 5 hour commute. Me and my now wife, then girlfriend or fiance, depending on time, we were still trying to figure out where we would be. She's a teacher now, but she hadn't figured out exactly or landed in this district for good yet. So she had been applying to Maryland too to see if she would get a job there. The teaching market was pretty difficult back then, talking like 2009, 2010, that time frame for me. But eventually she landed, and then I was doing that commute and living, kind of in apartments or where I, could find spots in New Jersey. But that commute was never going to last long term. So I had looked for jobs in New Jersey, had applied a lot to federal government jobs, trying to stay within that world. But I knew of PSEG, of course, because not only did I pay the bills, but they're a very well-known company. They've been around for over 100 years. And actually, my sister-in-law worked in the kind of IT department, so she had been like looking through some of the jobs, and one of the jobs that came up that I applied for was a process analyst, and I was fortunate enough to also get that job and be done with a very long commute. And really kind of that's really just what started the ball rolling for me. Process analyst in procurement, I did a lot of data analytics, making processing high level reports, managing each different projects. And then I decided after a couple of years that I wanted to transition to a different role, and that's where I am today. So I can get a little bit more understanding of like supply chain management and the process of actually negotiating with suppliers, pricing negotiations, contract management, a lot more in that area where you're actually dealing with a lot of clients who are just either the vendor clients or some of the people that work in PSEG when they want to get a product like security cameras or security equipment. They'll go to procurement and say, here, can you help us identify a vendor or work a new contract with a vendor? And that's where we come in and negotiate and do all of that. So that's sort of, kind of how I got started and how I got there. And as you can kind of see, that break in the change from political science to supply chain management, and a lot of it for me has happened on the job of just learning. But fortunate enough to have learned that through the job. But you definitely learn a lot of lessons doing that. I think just kind of where you start is kind of, kind of entry level where I started, and just kind of building yourself up to gain that knowledge and just kind of absorb a lot and then try to apply it later on. So it's very
Wow.
complicated explanation, but it's definitely one of those examples where you see people with degrees that don't necessarily have degrees that apply to their current jobs, but once you get the handle of why their experience is that way, then you understand it.
That's awesome. And actually, so this is like my fifth fireside chat, and I've noticed like the common theme is like people kind of go in to their like professional life with one idea in mind, or even just like college life, and then they're actually like on a totally different career path now. So you're definitely not alone in that. And that's really interesting to hear about.
Yeah, I think that's what you find a lot once you get out there, and I love internships. I think what you're doing is great, and I preach them to the end of degree, and I think I think they're great because they give you an example of what it's actually like to get sort of out of that college mindset in a sense, and understand what the workplaces are really operating as such, and that's where you really learn how jobs run, and that might help you fall into kind of where you think your what I call a niche is. And for me, it wasn't college that helped me find supply chain management or procurement. It was my work and getting lucky enough to kind of land with the Army. But what they called that an internship, but at least that was paid. But to start off pretty at a ground level and just kind of do 6 weeks plus of training or months of training to learn my job and understand that from all that perspective. That's really where I learned and kind of fine-tuned what I was going to end up doing probably for the rest of my career. And ever since then, I've just stayed in that same world, learning different aspects of what you would study in college as supply chain management.
Right. That's that real world experience really coming into play and helping out.
Yeah, if internships are great at that because you'll get that experience, and you start learning a lot about what you really end up kind of wanting to pursue. And for me, I'm happy with this niche. It's not political science, of course. There's levels of where it comes into play where you learn how to, because you write a lot. So I write a lot, and that comes into play. And obviously contracts have like a lot of legalese in them, so that gets somewhat into play of what you learn. But to be fascinated and really interested in one topic, but then learn, on the flip side, it's maybe not the best career path, or it's something you'd prefer much rather as a hobby than something you would go full on for. It's to get that experience where you're doing a lot of like day-to-day work. That's where internships are really good, for sure.
Absolutely. And especially like with young people, I think it's easy to sort of be stuck on this one idea of like how you want your life to unfold. But, being open to change is really the most important thing because it could take you places, as we can see with your story.
Yeah, I 100%. I just, you kind of, you start somewhere and you end up somewhere else. I think that's just typically how it goes. But you should, I mean, that's, like you said, it kind of like you get stuck on this idea of what you'd like to see. And that's not bad. I think it's good because it gives people a vision. But, you know, in sort of the transition to it all, you kind of learn a lot. And within that year, or even of plus of working for the state government and kind of being in that setting, I was like, this is going to be a tough path if I wanted to continue pursuing it further, or stick in the world of politics where there are some very good angles to it for sure that will, safe and secure, but for the most part, you're very much tied to somebody or something that could be risky. And I think that was one of the senses as I, looking to, as I was maturing and getting older and thinking about my family or building a family at the time, I'm just like, this is going to be tough. And look, I love the major and I love the topics, but for me, I always struggled to see how I could turn that into a full-time career for me. And this provided me a way to find a full-time career that still actually interests me still has some elements where you're, kind of using that background in communication. Really, they learn how to, kind of fine tune how you word things and all that comes from college, but at the same time apply it to a much more, what I would still call as a niche situation where, you know, um, supply chain management in itself is not one of the most well-known careers, I think. But it's a good career path for those who are interested in that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, just moving along here, my next question for you is, did you have any significant extracurricular experiences in high school and or college that you feel truly helped you later on in your career?
Um, it's tough because you still think about the career shift that I had. But I was a member of the political science club, so that was always fun. And part of what they called the Model UN in college. So I thought those were at least good from understanding how uh, kind of the volunteering and doing events and even just being in sort of a network help you. So I think those two in college kind of helped me to, gain that sort of that network that I, so much relied on at some point, especially when I started off and interning. Is, I knew I found my internship through networking, right? And knew, the internships and was from my political science club in that department. And was like, okay, I have friends who are working for this state senator. Let me go see if I can get an internship there. Boom, internship. Did that for like 3 years and kind of, while still going to college, and just, kept up learning and learning and learning from that. So I think, those kinds of clubs are helpful for really a lot more just basic networking. But also what I found is they do reflect more of the diversity that you could or will encounter, especially when you get out to the workforce, of just thought. Diversity of thought, as I would put it, a lot of different leadership positions in those clubs, and a lot of different mindset that bring to the table and help you learn how to actually, once you get to the job role where you're communicating between a lot of different parties that all have somewhat not always the same opinion, and, how do you work that in a respectful tone is always important.
Absolutely. And actually, it's interesting that you bring up networking because that's definitely another recurring theme in these fireside chats. Just the importance of it and the lack of like awareness that's given to young people about networking, at least up until they get into college and really like are exposed to the world of networking, internships, and all of that. So it
Yeah,
was definitely interesting that you brought that up.
I'm still friends with some of those folks that I initially networked with to get where I, started in the internships and everything like that. Um, so it's key. And I actually would be curious, and maybe you or somebody else could share how difficult it is now in a COVID virtual environment. It's like you're stuck in this like box almost in a way, and so it's got to be a lot of Zoom time, but B, it's different. It's totally different, I can imagine.
Yeah, I could actually speak to that. So I am a freshman and my entire experience so far has been virtual, but at the same time, I feel like I've actually been able to make the most of it, maybe more than I would have actually on campus in terms of just like clubs, organizations, networking, as you mentioned. I feel like for me, I knew that like, I'm in the circumstance, like instead of just kind of wallowing in it, I might as well just be proactive and like do what I can to make the most of it. So as I mentioned to you before, I did get involved in like student government and like other organizations and clubs. And of course, I'm doing this internship with JA. And this has also been entirely virtual for me. It's been like 3 months or so. So
Mhm.
I feel like, if anything, it's kind of kept me focused, the pandemic. Like if I did go to college physically, I would have been distracted with like the new environment and like meeting new friends and all of that. So in a way, I think it's kind of been a blessing in disguise for me. And yeah, I mean, it does kind of suck to just have like that interaction through a screen. It would be better in person, but you know, you got to do
Yeah,
what you got to do.
exactly. What is your position in student government?
I'm actually a class representative. That's like what they call it right now, but we're also committee based. So we have like different committees, and the one that I'm in is student life. So just sort of addressing and taking initiative on anything that the student body feels needs change or improvement. So that's kind of like what I do
Cool.
within that.
I think it's really good because if to context of it for me it's now is I take a look at it now. For me, um, being involved political science club and things like that were helpful, and now I make it, and I've made it a part of my own job too, to get involved in some of these what we call employee groups. And it's somewhat like you would consider volunteer, but obviously it's taking part of your workday. So, you know, but it's understood that you get involved with these, you know, different organizations. So right now I'm involved in two different ones from PSEG standpoint. We have what we call like the local inclusion team and procurement that focuses in a lot on diversity initiatives, diversity, equity, inclusion. And PSEG's been really good about promoting these types of things, especially even before the pandemic, but especially since after the pandemic, of just connecting through a virtual environment and all these good topics that have come through from it. Um, so that group, and then I'm also part of a group called ABLE, which is people that are with disabilities or caregivers with disabilities, and they could be visible or invisible disabilities. So I think, and now I have just started that one as a treasurer. So I think so that's a position I've taken on in addition to my normal day-to-day job. But I think that's where those experiences like you have in student government, you'll see it a lot in reality. And not saying you're not in reality now, but I mean in a environment where you put it to actual practice in professional environments, because it's all that stuff just comes into play every day. And it doesn't even have to be through those organizations. It will literally be in meetings that you have with, your boss or the people you work with, or, if you work with outside companies or vendors or any of that, you'll bring that to the table every time. I guarantee it, because you'll remember, here's how we went about this problem. Here's how I came to a solution, understanding that there are so many different viewpoints in a room.
Yeah, that's so good to hear. And I'm sure that the students who are listening into this also probably are parts of clubs, organizations, and can definitely utilize whatever they're learning now in the future as well.
Yeah. And once you get out there, a lot of the good bigger companies or even regular companies might have, or clubs or groups like that for volunteering. And I think you shouldn't be hesitant to, I think initially there's hesitation from my end, right? You're trying to learn your job. But don't be hesitant to start joining those. And that's another source of networking, because I'm coming into contact with all these people that I've never dealt with on a day-to-day basis. And it's just building, again, that network of people where you have a much more, what I, again, will continuously refer to diversity of thought, which I think is one of the biggest, things you'll ever experience in a professional world, or even in a college world, is that idea that you're not the only voice, right? And you don't, your opinion is important. You have a voice in the room, but you're not the only one who has an opinion. And I think when you're trying to come up with complex solutions to a lot of different problems, you need a lot of different diversity of thought.
Agreed. So my next question is, and you touched on this a little, but if you had some points that you wanted to highlight, I'm opening the floor. What led you to pursue the career that you have now? And were your aspirations for your career path different in high school and or college compared to how they actually unfolded?
Yeah, like you said, I touched on it. I think I had no clue what I was going to do in high school. And I don't honestly know if you need to. I think it's good if you do. But if I recall correctly, and you have to excuse me, the last time I was in college, I graduated in 2009. So it feels like ages ago now. But um, but I if I recall correctly, the first 2 years of college are pretty much heavily um, general requirements, right? I don't know if that's still the case, but you're shaking your head,
Yeah.
which makes me think yes.
Yep.
Yeah. So you don't get even into your major or your electives until you probably about a year and a half in. You might touch a little bit, but you don't know it right away. So high school, I had no clue. I started off college as a business administration major. That didn't last long. I can't do calculus. No. Good for you if you can, man. I don't know how anybody does calculus. It's tough. But I couldn't do it. I struggled and it wasn't for me. So I had taken an intro to poli sci class to really just say, hey, I took this part of the general requirements, and that's how I got into that. Because I was super interested. I thought it was super cool. And it is cool. It's really cool. You know, all that kind of stuff. And for a lot of people, it does lead to becoming a lawyer. I just had no intent of going to law school. So for me, it was just kind of, figure that portion out and, kind of get on that road that had led me to kind of what you see as kind of a scattered path, but in my head, it still makes sense. I started out working for the state legislature, really, for a state senator, but working in state government and doing a lot of policy or constituent services where you were actually dealing with people's problems, like, they couldn't, they needed assistance with electric bills or utility or heat or like people complaining about potholes. So I did a lot of that, dealing with that from that standpoint. But going from the state government to a federal government, like the DOD and the Army, granted, my career had the job position was nothing like that, but you still understood the level of, kind of the breakdown as far as I have state government experience and helps me in a federal government setting, of understanding bureaucracy and sort of how the chain of commands work and working for the Army as a civilian, and again getting that experience starting on really at the bottom to learn everything from in kind of that supply chain world and then bringing it later on. So I think it's a lot of timing. It's a lot of luck and timing, and it is a lot of work, I think, to do it now. I have a really good friend who's still getting out of college. He's like a bit younger than me. He's like 25. I'm 35, and he's like starting the grind of applying to jobs. He's like, oh my god, this is so hard. I'm like, this is going to be it's a job in itself to apply for jobs. For a long time, either when I was getting out of college or trying to find my path now, I spent a good year or two applying to jobs, and you're just applying and applying and applying, and you're also managing and updating your resume, you're updating cover letters, and you're doing all of that every time because you're trying to get to that table where you can at least get an interview. And I think, one of the things you have to accept is failure. Not failure, but you're not going to succeed every time. If I had each job I applied to the first time, I wouldn't be here. So I don't want to say failure because it's look, there's a lot of candidates for a lot of jobs, and sometimes you're not the best fit, or sometimes you are, and it just doesn't happen. So I think that's another thing. But I think, understanding career aspirations, going back to the original question, it's totally different. But you learn. And I think that for me was a big one. I definitely needed to mature. So thankfully, I think as much as I think college is an interesting thing because of how relevant or sometimes my resume can be or my background can be and background isn't, right? I don't think everyone needs a college degree to necessarily succeed. And I probably will have people chasing me to say that, not to say that. But the same point said is that it gave me a good opportunity in a structured environment to mature. And that was big for sure.
I think sort of what you talked about with high school and like not knowing what you wanted to do, like that is such a normal thing, but people think that it isn't, like they think they should have things figured out and, things should go one way, but it's totally okay to not have that be the case.
You're gonna get thrown curveballs. You're gonna get thrown curveballs. Let me tell you. I never planned in my life to be working in Maryland and driving and commuting in a van from New Jersey. It just works out, and you get lucky, and hopefully you have good timing. But you've got to be persistent, and you've got to be ready to apply for everything, or just apply and apply and apply and apply, and you don't stop because that the world doesn't stop too. It's just, but it's going to throw you curveballs. I don't. Uh, if you do know what you want to do in high school and you're set on it and that's your path, that's awesome. Just prepare for curveballs. Um, but if you don't, welcome to how many percentage of people that didn't know. I got no clue what I was doing after high school other than getting to college and starting that. But I was like, oh, business administration. Even when you're starting, even towards the end of college, I was still trying to figure out what my kind of future will really look like. And it wasn't until actually I even got out that it start really showing itself to me.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you said. And I think also in terms of like, changing your major, anything like that, it can also be easy to be swept up in this idea of like, I need to stick on one path, like, I don't want to divert. But at the end of the day, same thing as what I said with high school, like, it's totally okay and it's completely normal. So many people do it.
Yeah, I will say, admittingly, I was in college for 5 years. Part of that was changing my major. So, towards the end of it, I was in a rush to get out that door and try to get more into the environment of work. But and my wife is really good. She calls a lifelong learner. In a sense that she has and she's been on the same path. She's a bachelor's of education. She has a master's of education, and now she's doing certificates for principal and supervisor. So as of today, and we've got two young kids. I got a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old. So she's still doing school, literally like online now, Monday nights and Saturdays, and she's still going in that world where you're learning in school. I'm like, oh my God, I can't even imagine doing this. I haven't been in school in an environment like that really since 2009. So it's to see that still from that passion of learning more and looking into that. I mean, this year I had a discussion with my manager and talking about what kind of certifications I could look at for my career. So I don't think it ends for a lot of people, and that's okay. It's actually better sometimes if you're later on in your career path, because then you can hopefully get your job to pay for it. But even then, I think if not, you have a much more defined zone in focus, right? For me, I'm looking to get a certification potentially in supply chain management or in that kind of area. So it's my focus, it's my niche. It's going to actually apply to what I'm doing day to day, and it'll actually bring real elements from my job into that and reverse it. And I think that's where it becomes really important for that like aspect of like lifelong education, because by then at my point I've generally figured out, okay, this is my path for the next 30 years likely. Never know where curveballs will come, but I don't anticipate leaving it.
Absolutely. So, just to wrap up our fireside chat, I have one last question for you. What advice would you give to young people who will be embarking on their professional lives soon?
A few things. Intern. Even if it's unpaid. Volunteer. I can be like a broken record here. Because that's how you get your networks, and that's how you really learn kind of what you could do on a day-to-day basis. Grind. I think grinding it out is important. Uh, you're gonna probably get out of college, and it depends on your major, depends on everything, but you're not gonna probably make a lot of money offhand, um, and that's okay. I think um, this people have this idea of what they want to make money wise, and it's hard to understand when you're in the moment, especially if you got bills to pay and a lot of things to do. But there's going to be, there could potentially be points where you're almost kind of biting a bullet in a sense, of just taking in, you know, what you would basically pay out. I was going paycheck to paycheck in my first year in the DoD, in the Army. I was making very, entry level money. It's not a lot of money, to think about, but I think for that, it's just important to know that you're gaining experience, and gaining experience and developing your career early on is part of that path to be present more successful opportunities later. So if you're looking out of college to get a six-figure job, I'd be surprised. I mean, maybe it happens, especially in different career paths, but I was nowhere near that when I started. And I think that's important. Um, but I think mostly, and this is really something I've started learning in the last year, is be yourself, and don't be afraid to uh, use your voice and advocate for things that you care about. And I think a lot of it is, for me, was learning, adapting to a professional environment and getting my feet wet. In the first year, I could tell you, my current job, I was scared, completely scared. Because it's a major transition for me. It was a place that I really loved working at. I could never say anything. I loved working for the DoD and the Army and my group that I was working with in Maryland. I loved every second of it. It was an awful commute. So I had to switch. And getting in from a government to a corporate level job was totally a shock, in a sense, because it was a nice like jump in the paycheck, but then 1 month later I was going, oh, that's why. Because I'm busy a lot all the time, over busy. But I think, being yourself is important in that situation, and getting those opportunities now. Look at what you guys are doing here in, your junior achievement organization, and what you're doing for student government. And all those things and organizations that you should get involved in. And I look at what I'm doing now, and it's super important to me. I think I've enjoyed this past year professionally more than probably most previous years. And it's because I've really become myself to speak a little bit more out about the things I care about. And whether that be diversity, equity, inclusion, or for me, it's mental health. Mental health is a big thing. Mental health and mental illness. I'm somebody with a mental illness we never see visibly, right? It's not a visible disability, but it's an invisible one. So to speak out about that, to come to the table now and actually admittedly say that open years down the road, right? It's not something you would ever think about doing when you first get in there, but it's really important to me now. And I think that's made me grow so much more and feel much more comfortable where my standing, where I'm no longer, scared about hiding things or saying things that, are being important to me. But also I think for, when you get into those organizations, and hopefully they have programs that preach these types of things. The reason why I'm talking to you today is because our local inclusion team put out a volunteer for this group email. So I wouldn't even known about it if I'm not a member of the organization, or if our company didn't, set goals around these things, saying, hey, look, everyone's now going to get involved in these types of things. And having a company, I'll do a shameless plug for PSEG here, but having a company like PSEG, who's been at the forefront of trying to be, bring in this diversity, equity, inclusion model and volunteerism and all these other different things that they're really being, you know, all in on. I think that's made me feel really much more comfortable. Like, this is a place I want to work. And that was really one of the biggest criteria I had. Even when after working for the DoD and in the Army and working in that diverse workforce that I was in, and working for the federal government that had a lot of the same type, kind of structures of beliefs, I think that for me was core tenet for me. I don't think I could work for a company or something like that that didn't believe in the things that my company does. So volunteer, intern, be yourself, join organizations. Don't be afraid of titles. A VP is just the person. They're all human beings. They're all the same as you. Directors, VPs, doesn't matter. CEO, don't know. I have encountered our CEO plenty of times, and just a person. Very important person, but he's just a person. So I don't think you should be scared of those things, and be scared to join and be vocal about the things you care about. That's really the best I could tell you.
That was incredible. Thank you so much for sharing. It means a lot.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So that's all I had for today. Thank you so much again for joining. It means a lot. And I know the students as well as myself will definitely take a lot away from this.
Yeah, hopefully next year we get to do this in person.
That'd be awesome. A real fireside chat around a fire.
I think last year we tried to volunteer for the in-person. It was going to be something in person, and it literally happened right around this time. So of course, I think it was about a month or two before we were planning it, and I forget what it was going to be, but I had volunteered for that, and then of course COVID. So here we are.
Yeah, it happens, I guess. I don't know.
It's okay.
The new normal.
The new normal for now.
All right, so let me just stop sharing. Recording.